In this video, I will review Emotional Agility by Susan David. Susan says that the goal of this book is to help you become more aware of your emotions, to learn to accept them, and then to flourish by increasing your emotional agility. Keep watching to find out more. Hi, I'm Linda and welcome to my YouTube channel, Better You Books, where I read and review books that help you to become a better version of yourself. In today's review of Emotional Agility, I will tell you more about Susan David, the format of the book, my thoughts and key takeaways, as well as my favourite quote, before letting you know who I recommend this book for and giving it a rating out of 5. So keep watching to the end to see what score I gave it. This book was recommended to me and I read it for the first time earlier this year. It was originally released in 2016 and was a #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller. Susan is from South Africa, but she now lives in the USA with her family. And she said that this book is based on over 20 years of her practical and academic experience. Susan is an award-winning Harvard Medical School psychologist, and she also won the Thinkers50 Award for Breakthrough Ideas. For those of you who've never heard of this before, this award is given to ideas that kind of have a eureka moment in management. And it's kind of about ideas that change the way we think about business forever. Susan is also a sought-after public speaker, and a TED Talk that she did back in 2017 went viral with over 1 million views in its first week of release. She also has a podcast. In the book, Susan writes, "Emotional agility allows us to be our authentic selves for everyone, every day. Emotional agility is the absence of pretense and performance. It gives your actions greater power because they emanate from your core values and core strength, something solid and genuine and real." This book is divided into 11 chapters that take you from emotional rigidity to agility, and there are also dedicated chapters to emotional agility at work and raising emotionally agile children. Here are my 3 key takeaways from reading this book. #1, make peace with even your most difficult emotions. Susan writes, "Most of us use default behaviors that we hope can deflect or disguise our negative feelings so we won't have to face them. Others settle deeply into these feelings and struggle to get beyond them, or we attempt to cope with difficult times and difficult emotions through cynicism, irony, or gallows humour." In the book, Susan talks about striving to always be perfectly happy will only lead to failure and frustration, and we need to make peace with even our most difficult emotions. She says that even the darkest and most negative emotions have a message to tell us. For example, envy can be a strong motivator for improving. I believe that making peace with difficult emotions is an important message for me, as I've always kind of thought of negative emotions as bad. Since lockdown, I've been on furlough from work, and I live alone, so this could have been a really tricky time for me. But I've been keeping myself busy and challenged, for example, starting this YouTube channel, and I've honestly been genuinely happy most days. But then when I have had the odd day where I haven't felt so happy or so motivated or so energetic, my first instinct is to try and override that emotion and try and work out how I can be happy again. But I know now that all emotions are valid, and I need to try and sit with these emotions more and work out what they're trying to tell me rather than just pushing them away. #2, don't accept your thoughts as facts. In the book, Susan writes, "Our own internal narrator may be biased, confused, or even engaged in willful self-justification or deception. Even worse, it will not shut up. While we often accept the statements bubbling up from within this river of incessant chatter as being factual, most are actually a complex mixture of evaluations and judgments, intensified by our emotions. Some of these thoughts are positive and helpful, others are negative and unhelpful." Susan says that we shouldn't accept all of our thoughts as facts, and we reserve the right to only act on the thoughts that help us to live the life that we want to live. She also talks about autopilot responses, which I can definitely relate to. Maths is not my strongest subject, so I've told myself that I'm no good at it at all. So often, when a mathematical question comes on, say like a TV quiz, my first instinct is, I can't do it. and my mind just completely shuts down and I'm just not even capable of answering the question. However, when I realize that this is a thought, not a fact, and I think about the question, I realize most of the time I'm more than capable of answering it. And also, most of the time, it wasn't even that difficult to start with. Finally, number 3, self acceptance takes a big hit when we compare. I'm sure we're all really aware of this, especially these days with the prevalence of social media. But something that Susan wrote in the book I found really interesting. Looking to someone whose accomplishments are just a notch or two above your own might be inspiring, but judging yourself against a true superstar or a once-in-a-lifetime genius can be devastating. That's in part because we tend to focus on the end result rather than on what it takes to get there. I found that really interesting because perhaps when we're trying to aspire to something in our lives, maybe we should be looking at someone who's just a few steps ahead. But I also thought the part about the journey was really interesting as well. And I think it's one of the main reasons why I enjoyed Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, so much. Because these days, Nike's one of the biggest, most powerful brands on the planet. But it didn't start off that way. And it was actually a really long, difficult road to get there. So I think sometimes we can just look at someone and think it's been so easy for them to get where they are today. But rarely is that the case. I love quotes, and this is my favourite quote from the book. Courage is not an absence of fear, it is fear walking. I've read a lot of good quotes about fear recently, but I particularly like the visual of this one. I didn't enjoy this book that much when I first read it. I felt that a book about emotional agility should be more emotive. I really value authenticity and vulnerability, and I feel that in Susan's TED Talk, she really delivered on both of those aspects, but not so much in the book. I know that she's a psychologist, so perhaps she wanted the book to be more professional, academic, and clinical. However, the last book I read, Just Eat It by Laura Thomas, brilliantly combined science, research, and personality. However, having reread the book for this review, I think I was a little bit too harsh on it the first time around. It is an easy book to read, and there were a lot of anecdotes which I found enjoyable. However, I'm really surprised that she won this Breakthrough Ideas Award for this concept, just because it doesn't feel that new. A lot of the ideas in the book were things like habits and self-compassion and mindset have been talked about in a lot of other books, including some that I've read recently. However, the other books I read recently, the delivery had more of an impact on me. I've realised recently that people like Rachel Hollis and Marie Forleo really speak to me, and I find them really inspiring and motivating. Whereas with this book, I was reading the book thinking, yeah, that makes sense. But her style didn't make me want to get up like off the sofa and actually do something about it. So I think personally, those kind of writers speak to me more. However, this is so subjective, and I'm sure that so many people would much rather read a book written by an academic and an expert. However, I really do think that she could have used her expertise more in this book. I didn't really get the idea of what she does for a living or how she got to this conclusion about emotional agility. What was her journey? How did she get here? I think that this book could have really benefited from some case studies as well, so we could really understand how important it is to be an emotionally agile person. I also think this book could have really benefited from some exercises to really bring the concepts to life. I got to the end of the book and I thought, well, yeah, I've read about some really interesting takeaways, but I don't really know how to take them away and put them into my own life. Susan has an online quiz where you can test your own emotional agility, and I think something like that incorporated into the book could have made a really big difference. I think this book has some good takeaways and it was an easy and enjoyable read. However, I think it could have been so much better. I would have liked to have seen some more personal insights, case studies, and exercises. This wasn't my favourite book that I have read recently, but I think that even if you can get one really good takeaway from a book and actually apply it to your life, then it was definitely a worthwhile read. And for me, the concept of negative emotions not necessarily being bad and not having to be happy and positive all the time was really useful. Therefore, I am giving this book 3 stars. I would recommend it to anyone who finds that their emotions control them rather than the other way around, and definitely for anyone who would prefer to read a book written by an academic and an expert. What do you think? Are you interested in reading this book for yourself? If so, drop a comment below to let me know. I've included a link to the book, a link to the emotional agility quiz, and more information on Susan in the description. If you prefer listening to audiobooks rather than reading, this book is also available on Audible. Or if you don't have the time to read right now, I would recommend Susan's TED Talk. Next week, I will be reviewing Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. Sandberg describes this book as sort of a feminist manifesto, and it was a cultural phenomenon when it first came out in 2013. So watch next week to see if it's still relevant 7 years later. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please click subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're the first to know about my future videos. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you next time.